Hey guys, I'm continuing work on the Philco 3930 radio. I've got the transformer remounted and I'm about to start wiring it back in. Before I can though, I need to rebuild the line filter capacitor. That's that part number 41 there. It's a dual 0.01 microfarad capacitor. And because those are on the AC line, you really should use capacitors designed to go on the AC line like these. And here is the Bakelite block that the capacitors will go inside of. I'm heating it up with a heat gun and picking away at this tar-like substance. I think it's actually black wax. And once I get those out, I'll wire these in, and then it mounts like so. And I'll wire the transformer up to that, and the power switch, and a line cord. I'm going to install a fuse as well. After I picked out the remains of the old capacitors, I cleaned it up with some lacquer thinner and Q-tips, soldered in the new capacitors, and now it's ready to reinstall. I installed that capacitor block and started wiring it in. The fuse is actually inside this black plastic tube here. Slide this back. See it down in there. Now, I was going to finish wiring this up when I noticed that the insulation is also crumbling and falling off of this audio output transformer. So next up, I'm going to unsolder the wires to this, pull it out, and see what I can do to repair those. It's been a few years since I got this radio, but as best I can remember, it did more or less work. So I'm assuming that all the critical components are good. However, somebody online saw me posting about this radio and warned me that the output transformers on these sets have a tendency to go bad. So I'm checking the resistance on it right now. The secondary is very low ohms, very low resistance, which is what it should be because that's what drives the voice coil there. On the other side, the primary, it says should be 400 ohms. Well, I've got this VTVM on the 10K range, and I got about 6 here, so that's 60K. In other words, several orders of magnitude higher than it should be. But it's not open. I also noticed that if I squeeze the transformer a little bit, the resistance changes. So I'm hoping that, in fact, I can get it to go quite a bit, well, a bit lower anyways. So I'm hoping that maybe there's just a bad connection in here somewhere. But this could be a showstopper right here until I track down a replacement. Here's the two primary leads. They go under this paper here, so I guess I could try peeling back the paper a little bit. You can kind of feel them. They go up under the paper and they tap into the transformer somewhere, I assume. Good news, I kept digging and eventually found some clean, intact sections of wire, and I stripped the insulation off and tested it, and I'm down to 400 ohms. So there's one here, there's one here. Now what I'm doing is preparing a couple new wires, and I want to hot glue them in place before I attempt to solder those little wires onto them. Otherwise, if these wires are flopping around, they could just break those little wires right off. Alright, I think we're back in business. I got those two new leads hot glued down, and I carefully soldered in the little fine wires from the transformer. And if I check the resistance now, down to about 430 ohms or so. Just just about where it should be. Carefully seal or bend this paper back down, and maybe wrap some electrical tape around it or something, and reinstall. I sealed up the transformer and remounted it in the radio, and then wired it back in. It may look a little ugly, but I hope it will hold up. I then continued my hunt for Philco capacitors, and I actually found some that I think will work out alright. They do have the correct values printed on them. For example, here's a 0.03 microfarad. Now the part number is not quite the same. I was looking for a 30-4449, but this is a 30-4447. I suspect the difference would be voltage ratings, but the capacitance is correct, and this is 600 volts. I wouldn't be surprised if the 49 was 400 volt or less. And likewise, I found one for 0.01 and 0.015. The only one I couldn't find was a 0.006. That's used on the tone control. So for now, I just soldered it right in. If I come across one, I can always restuff it. So then I went through the rest of the radio to take stock of what other capacitors were there, assuming that these are all the originals. But I found some stuff that just wasn't matching the schematic, so I'm going to have to do some more digging. For example, this big cap down in here, it says 30-4170. That doesn't exist in the parts list. The closest thing I can find on this diagram here is this guy, which just says part number 13, which is a 0.1 microfarad tubular cap, which would be sizable, but the part number is totally different. It's 4455, this is a 4710. I can't see the value on it because of the way it's twisted around, so we'll have to see on that. And then things got even more confusing when I got to this point. This resistor, this tie point, this capacitor do not exist on the parts placement at all or on the schematic. The resistor end is going to pin 4 on the 78. If we look over here, I wrote in the pin numbers. So we got pin 4, goes down and around, and there is a resistor connected to it, and the other side goes around and around to the bias resistor. However, this resistor is 1 meg, whereas that is 2 meg, and it's listed as part 29, which is shown on the parts diagram over here underneath the push button tuners. And I was able to find it. It's poking out right down in there. So all the stuff on the schematic is present and accounting for. So this definitely seems to be an addition of some sort. But it also looks to be pretty old, and that is a Philco capacitor, and this resistor looks similar to other resistors in the radio, so it might be original. I'll have to look through his service bulletins and whatnot, and maybe at some point that was added to the radio. Don't know. I'll just read the values off those parts and assume that they were put there for a reason and just keep moving on. Something else I've done is I went ahead and tested the tubes I had on hand. They were all pretty good except for the 75 and the 37. They're both quite weak. So I went hunting. I found a number of used 75s. I'm going to go through and test them. 37 took me a while to track down. In fact, I had to dip into some old some tubes I picked up quite some time ago and did a video on, and I was able to find a new old stock one. But I'd kind of like to keep that in storage if at all possible, and I kept digging and found some used ones. The reason I'd like to avoid using this is You don't find too many new old stock tubes from this era, so I like to say that as a last resort or for a more special radio. I'll try using these first. And here's also another 75, and I also dug up a 6F6G, which I will be needing for a later project, my Philco 38.7. And I also ordered some tubes online. There's a guy selling just dozens and dozens, maybe several hundred tubes. They were all buy it now, so I looked through all of them one by one and picked out a few that I think I'll have a use for. In particular, I got another 6A8G, and I think a 6K7 or 6Q7G, and this 485. These two would be for my Philco 38.7 or 38.10, and this would actually be for my Spartan Equisone 931. I do have a set of 484 tubes, but I've also been slowly accumulating a few 485s. 485 was the next generation, so to speak. I think they had a better filament characteristic. So I figured, what the heck, you don't see them for sale that often, so I went ahead and grabbed that. Now, I don't know if these tubes are good, and of course I've got to check these used tubes, so for that I can't use my Cardmatic Hickok tube tester because I just do not have cards for tubes this old. I could use my triplet emission type tester, but that only gives you, well, it'll tell you if the tube is dead or if it has some life, and I guess a reasonable reading of how good it is, but I can go a little bit better than that, and that would be my I-177 military tube tester, which is down here, so I'm going to pull that out and let it warm up and try testing these tubes. I've got my tester set up for the Type 75 tube, and here's one of the used ones I pulled out. Happens to be a Philco branded tube, which is nice. First I'll check it for shorts. Alright, no shorts. And now to test quality. Alright, nice strong tube. Now I just need to find a good Type 37. Here's a used Tungsol Type 37. Let's see how it tests. Good, no shorts. And as for the quality, not too bad. Certainly a lot better than the old 37 that was in this set. So I'll go with this guy. So that gives me a set of good tubes to try on this radio. I'm starting to work down in this corner, and in addition to this modification, I've also discovered some old repairs. For example, there should be a 3K resistor here. Instead, there's a couple 6.2K resistors paralleled up. I have also found more of that crumbly wire. I had thought that it was restricted mostly to this side of the radio, but definitely this wire here is falling apart, and so is this black wire here. Some of the others are fairly pliable, and I was thinking that I could avoid touching these IF cans, but one wire is falling apart, and there is a resistor down in there that I'd like to check. I figure since I got the radio opened up this much, I might as well go ahead and work on that and double check everything, which means I have to free up 1, 2, 3, 4 wires and then undo these 2 lugs, so it's not that bad. And then there's another one over here. This one, however, seems to be in even better shape. None of these wires seem brittle, so I think I'll leave that one alone. And then we'll go from there. I got the coil up fairly easily. Now if you notice, there's 5 wires coming out of it. which may seem a little odd if you look at the schematic, because it only shows 4 wires. So this is 20 right here. So we've got 2 in the primary, 2 in the secondary. But in reality, inside of that can, there's this 51K resistor, and I believe these 2 caps. See how they're labeled 20B and 20C. So that 5th wire coming out is actually this ground right here. And then this brown lead. So this actually is inside the can. So we've got 1 wire, 2 wires, 3 wires, 4, and 5. Notice something else is that it's quite loose inside. Normally it would be held firmly by this nut, which is on there fairly tight, so I'm not sure why it's flopping around. I suspect it's something maybe broken inside. In fact, as I turn this, it's actually not coming off. The thread shaft is just turning. Apply a little pressure while I turn the nut. Nope. Alright, so I suspect it's that mounting. Oh yeah, I can see it now, man. That seems to have really broken loose. Yikes. Like the only thing holding this coil in are a couple of the fine wires on the coil, so I have to be very careful getting this apart. And let's hope there's no serious damage inside, then I can just glue it back together. I finally got the coil out, and I think I'll be alright. Here's the shaft that was just flopping around. That's supposed to be firmly attached through the center of this coil, which is so loose now. But luckily the 2 wires are still intact and not broken. And there's that resistor, and should be a couple capacitors in here somewhere. So there's a one variable capacitor, and oh well, okay, maybe those other caps are actually just all built into the layers of this cap. I'll have to examine that a little more closely. As far as that loose shaft, it's supposed to be going down in there. It looks like there's some kind of, well, you can see there's a hole down there where the screw used to go through. And I suspect there used to be some kind of wax holding it in place. So I'll try using some kind of glue or wax or something to get it to stay in there a bit more firmly, and I'll rewire this. I measured this resistor and it's about 62K, so I want to replace that. But before I do, I want to stabilize this coil. So I took a bit of hot glue, put some around the base here, so it's on there pretty solid, but still have to deal with this. I suspect that originally there was a nut holding it on the other side. So I want to put a new one on, but this is brass, and if I used an iron-based nut or washer, that could very well throw off the behavior of this coil. So I dug up a brass nut. I hope that doesn't screw up the coil, and also a little brass locking washer. So now the fun part is going to be to try to get the washer and the nut down in there onto that shaft and then tighten it down. With the help of a toothpick, I was able to get that washer and nut down inside the coil and tighten it up. Then I cleaned off the remains of the old wiring and soldered on some new wires, and it's all ready to go back together. I reinstalled the IF transformer and wired it in down here. Now down in there was also a capacitor. This guy is down in here, right like that. I clipped it out, and this is going to be the first one that I'll restuff. So I'm going to get out my heat gun and start heating this up, and the inside should slide right out. Then I can put a new cap inside, and I'll seal the ends with some brown hot glue. When you heat these up, you get the insides out. It also melts all the nasty old dirty wax on the outside, so the printing becomes much clearer. It's not a bad idea to wipe it down while it's still hot. Get all that old nasty wax off. It's probably not quite hot enough to get the insides out yet. They use a higher temperature wax on the end plugs than they do on the outer coating. It takes a little more heat to get that softened up. Not yet. No, that's got it. Alright, just let that tube cool down a little bit and stick a new cap inside. Here's a closer look at it. Came out quite nice. Ready for a new cap. Now the original was rated for 400 volts. And I do have some 400 volt caps, but why not just go with 630s? There's plenty of room for it to fit inside, and that gives you some overhead, so it's not going to be burning out anytime soon. Then I'll get my glue gun going and plug up the ends. It will look just like new. There's one capacitor done. Now I've got about a dozen more to go. I'll end the video here and pick up in the next segment when I'm further along.